Can You Survive? Can You Survive is a top-down run-and-gun shooter where players fight against an endless horde of enemies to see not only how much points they can accumulate, but how long can they survive. Players will spend their time running, shooting, and outsmarting the enemy. The goal? Survive as long as you possibly can. So the game begins with the player starting at a random set location on the map. The map itself will also start on a random layout. The idea is to have one large map that alters every 2 minutes, closing off certain sections and opening up others. The rules are relatively simple. Don't get hit. If the player comes into contact with an enemy, then the player loses. To prevent this from happening, the player will have the ability to shoot. They will be able to run and fire at the same time, including the ability to fire in all directions. But shooting is not the only means of survival. There will be times when the player will need to decide between fighting his way through a horde or taking a different route and attempt shooting back towards the enemy instead. As players continue to survive, the enemy horde will only grow larger, making it harder and harder with each passing second for the player to survive. Since running and shooting are the only two options available to survive, and one has to be stronger than the other. So to do this, the player will have power-ups that will help ease the burden. But these power-ups don't pop up frequently, are harder to find, and are also limited. There are a variety of power-ups that will be at the disposal of the player. For example, one such power-up will have the ability to destroy several enemies at once. But when picked up, the player will only have the opportunity of using it once, so deciding when to use it will be critical. Another antagonizing force is the map itself. With the map mutating every 2 minutes, a passageway that was once open could potentially become a death trap. Now, similar games to be considered are Smash TV and Zombie Barrage. Both were top-down shooters that had players taking down waves of enemies. The difference in Can You Survive is the transformation on how the waves work. There will never be a pause in the game, so the horde will constantly bombard the player. With each passing second, the player will encounter an increasing amount of enemies, but every 2 minutes when the map layout changes, so will the number of enemies. The numbers will drastically increase every 2 minutes, and I mean drastically. This will not only augment the difficulty, but also give a real test to the name of the game. But what are the risks? To be honest, there are several. One of which is trying to figure out how to successfully set up enemy spawn locations as the map changes and develops. The idea is to have the enemy spawn only in the layout where the player is currently in, and not in the area that's closed off. All that's going to do is flood the closed off section to the point where the minute it's opened, the player is going to feel overwhelmed, potentially creating a challenge so severe that it'll deter the player from playing the game, and that is not what we want. Thank you for listening.